You don't lose your life in big moments. You lose it in small emotional reactions. Not in the major decisions, not in the dramatic turning points, but in the 5 seconds when anger speaks before wisdom, in the one text message you send too fast, in the meeting where pride answers instead of patience. I learned that the hard way. A few years ago, I was sitting in a conference room during what should have been a routine review. A colleague questioned one of my decisions. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't disrespectful, but something in me felt attacked. Before I even realized what was happening, I interrupted. My voice sharpened. My tone shifted. I defended instead of listening. The room changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but subtly. Trust lowered, respect weakened. And when that meeting ended, I didn't feel powerful. I felt exposed. That moment didn't ruin my career, but it showed me something uncomfortable. I wasn't in control of my emotions. They were in control of me. And the truth is, most of us live like that. We say that's just how I am. We say I'm passionate. We say anyone would react that way. But reaction is easy. Mastery is rare. Later that year, a close friend of mine went through something similar. He lost a major opportunity. Not because he lacked skill, not because he lacked intelligence, but because in a high-pressure conversation, he let frustration take over. One emotional surge cost him months of progress. That's when we both made a decision. We stopped trying to control the world and started learning to control ourselves. And everything changed. Give me 10 minutes and I'll help you master your emotions. That sentence isn't a slogan. It's a promise. Because emotional mastery doesn't require a personality transplant. It doesn't require becoming cold, detached, or robotic. It requires awareness. It requires training. It requires a pause. Over the next hour, we're going deeper than 10 minutes. We're building a system, a way to understand why you react, a way to create space between feeling and action, a way to turn anger into clarity, anxiety into preparation, conflict into strength. You don't need to suppress your emotions. You need to lead them. Because unmanaged emotions quietly shape your life. They shape your relationships, your career, your confidence, the way people perceive you, the way you perceive yourself. But trained emotions, they build trust. They build stability. Now they build power. Imagine walking into difficult conversations calm and centered. Imagine receiving criticism without collapsing or exploding. Imagine responding with clarity instead of reacting with regret. That version of you isn't fake. It's trained. And the good news is this. Emotional strength is not a personality trait. It's a skill. And skills can be learned. But if you've ever regretted something you said in anger, if you've ever felt anxiety control your decisions, if you've ever wished you could rewind a reaction, you're exactly where you need to be. Stay with me. And if as you listen someone comes to mind, a friend, a partner, a colleague, someone you know is struggling with their reactions, their stress, their anger, share this video with them. It might be the message that helps them take back control and quietly change the direction of their life. Chapter 1. The invisible damage of uncontrolled emotions. There is a form of damage that leaves no bruise, no headline, no dramatic collapse. Yet it quietly reshapes your life. It happens in conversations. It happens in tone. It happens in the space between what you feel and what you choose to say. Uncontrolled emotions rarely destroy everything at once. Instead, they erode. They chip away at trust. They bend perception. They slowly train people to experience you in a certain way. And once people experience you in a certain way long enough, that becomes your identity in their minds. A neighbor of mine, Marcus, once shared a story that stayed with me. He owned a small but growing construction company. Hardworking, fair, intelligent. His team respected his technical knowledge, but they feared his temper. Marcus didn't scream daily. He wasn't constantly angry. But when something went wrong, a delayed delivery, a mistaken measurement, and a missed email, his reaction was immediate and sharp. He would speak quickly, intensely, sometimes with sarcasm. Why is this always happening? Do I have to do everything myself? This is basic. He thought he was motivating his team. He believed urgency required intensity. One afternoon, a new project manager made a minor scheduling error. Nothing catastrophic, fixable within hours. Marcus reacted the way he always did. Tight voice, rapid words, visible frustration. The project manager didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply nodded. 2 months later, that same project manager accepted an offer from another company. When Marcus asked him why, the answer wasn't about salary. It's just I don't feel calm here. That sentence stunned him. He had built a business. He had secured contracts. He had proven his capability. Yet, the atmosphere he created through emotional volatility was pushing people away. An uncontrolled emotion doesn't just affect what happens. It affects how people feel around you. And how people feel around you determines how long they stay, how deeply they trust, and how honestly they communicate. Here is the paradox. Intensity can produce short-term compliance, but calm produces long-term loyalty. Many people confuse emotional expression with authenticity. They say, "I'm just being real." But being real does not require being reactive. Authenticity without regulation becomes unpredictability, and unpredictability creates distance. When others cannot predict your emotional response, they begin managing you instead of collaborating with you. They soften their feedback. They filter their honesty. They calculate their words. Over time, you stop receiving the truth. Not because people are dishonest, but because they are cautious. That is invisible damage. There's an old story about a glass of water that illustrates this perfectly. So, let's imagine holding a glass filled halfway with water. It's not heavy at first, but if you hold it out with your arm extended for a minute, it begins to feel uncomfortable. Hold it for 10 minutes and your muscles tighten. Hold it for an hour and your arm may go numb. The weight of the glass never changed. The strain came from how long you held it. Unregulated emotions are similar. A single moment of anger is manageable. But when you carry it, rehearse it, justify it as and project it outward repeatedly, it becomes heavy for you and for those around you. And here is something even deeper. Emotional reactivity often disguises insecurity. When someone challenges your idea and you respond defensively, what are you protecting? When someone interrupts you and you respond sharply, what are you afraid of losing? Respect, status, control. Very often, the intensity of the reaction reveals the fragility beneath it. This is not weakness. It is human wiring. 1. Your brain is constantly scanning for threats. Not only physical threats, but social ones. Exclusion, embarrassment, rejection, being perceived as incompetent. These register internally as danger signals. But here is the crucial distinction. Not every signal deserves a response. A skilled pilot does not react to every flicker on the dashboard. They assess. They interpret. They respond only when necessary. Imagine if a pilot panicked at every minor turbulence shift. Named the passengers would never feel safe. In your life, you are the pilot and people feel your turbulence. Another small but powerful example comes from a teacher I once interviewed for a leadership workshop. She taught middle school, an environment full of emotional energy. One day, a student loudly challenged her authority in front of the class. The room froze. Every instinct in her body wanted to assert dominance, to shut the student down, to re-establish control immediately. Instead, she paused. She walked slowly to her desk. She took a sip of water. Then, she calmly said, "We'll talk after class." The class exhaled. Afterward, she explained something remarkable. "If I had reacted emotionally, I would have taught my students that power equals loudness. By staying calm, I taught them that power equals control. That moment did more for her authority than any sharp response ever could. Uncontrolled emotions often feel like strength because they are loud. But true strength is stable. Now, consider this. Every time you respond impulsively, you reinforce a habit loop: trigger, emotion, reaction, relief, and your brain rewards the release. It learns this is how we handle discomfort. But what if relief is not the goal? What if growth is? Emotional maturity requires tolerating discomfort without immediately discharging it. It requires sitting with irritation without turning it into accusation. Sitting with disappointment without turning it into blame. And yes, that feels unnatural at first because reacting is easy. Mastering is deliberate, so take a moment and think about the environments where you feel most at ease. Perhaps it's around a friend who listens without overreacting, or a mentor who remains steady under pressure, or a family member who absorbs tension without escalating it. Calm people create psychological safety, and psychological safety allows honesty, creativity, and trust to flourish. When your emotions are uncontrolled, you may win arguments. You may assert dominance. You may feel temporarily validated. But when your emotions are mastered, you win influence. Influence lasts longer than intensity. So here is your reflection exercise for this chapter. Identify one area of your life where emotional volatility has become normalized. It might be at work. It might be at home. It might be in traffic. It might even be in your own self-talk. Ask yourself, what atmosphere am I creating in that space? Do people feel safe around my emotions? Do I feel proud of how I show up there? Do not answer defensively. Answer honestly, because the invisible damage of uncontrolled emotions is not meant to shame you. It is meant to awaken you. Every interaction plants a seed. Calm plants trust. Volatility plants caution. And over time you will live in the garden you cultivate. The question is not whether you feel emotions. The question is whether your emotions shape your environment, or whether you consciously shape them. Chapter 2. The Power of the Pause. There is a moment, small, almost invisible, between stimulus and response. Most people never notice it. That moment is the difference between regret and respect, between escalation and resolution, between who you are now and who you are capable of becoming. It is the pause, not silence out of weakness, not avoidance, not suppression, but a deliberate interruption of impulse. The pause is where power lives. I once worked with a senior executive named Elena, and she led a fast-moving tech team. High stakes, constant deadlines, strong personalities. Pressure was normal. Conflict was common. Yet she was known for something rare: steadiness. One afternoon during a strategic meeting, two department heads began arguing over resource allocation. Voices rose. Frustration sharpened. Accusations began forming. Everyone turned to Elena. She did not speak. She leaned back slightly in her chair. She folded her hands. She took one slow breath, then another. So the silence stretched for about 5 seconds. 5 seconds can feel like an eternity in a tense room. Then she calmly said, "Let's clarify the objective before we debate the method." The energy shifted immediately. No lecture, no reprimand, no emotional charge, just 5 seconds of pause. After the meeting, I asked her about it. She smiled and said something simple: "If I react to their intensity, I multiply it. If I slow down, I control the temperature of the room." That is what the pause does. It regulates not only you, but your environment. Most emotional mistakes happen within the first few seconds of activation. A message arrives. A tone feels dismissive. A comment lands wrong. Your body reacts instantly. Heart rate increases. Muscles tighten. Breath shortens. And in that physiological spike, your thinking narrows. You feel urgency. But urgency is not always truth. The pause creates space for discernment. Now there is an old psychological experiment where participants were asked to press a button as soon as a light turned on. Almost everyone reacted within milliseconds. But when researchers added a second instruction, wait 3 seconds before pressing, accuracy improved dramatically in complex variations of the task. Speed felt efficient. Delay created precision. Emotional life works the same way. But here's something practical. Your nervous system cannot sustain peak activation for long without regulation. When you intentionally slow your breath, inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4, you send a signal to your body that there is no immediate danger. The pause is biological as much as it is mental. Let me tell you a small story about a text message. A friend of mine, Rachel, received a late-night message from her partner that read, "We need to talk tomorrow." No emoji, no explanation. Immediately, her mind filled the silence with fear. Was something wrong? Had she done something? Was this about the argument from last week? She began typing a long response, defensive, anxious, probing. Then she remembered a rule she had been practicing. Never respond to emotionally charged messages after 10 p.m. So she put the phone down. The next morning, her partner clarified. He wanted to discuss vacation plans, nothing dramatic, nothing threatening. Had she responded immediately, she would have created tension that didn't need to exist. The pause prevented unnecessary damage. And GT, and GT, and GT, and GT. Most people assume mastery requires controlling emotions themselves, but emotions arise automatically. The real leverage point is what happens immediately after they arise. You cannot stop the wave from forming, but you can decide whether to surf it or be pulled under. The pause is not passive. It is active restraint. Imagine driving a car downhill. See, if you remove your foot from the brake completely, gravity takes over. But if you apply gentle pressure, you control the descent. Your emotions are momentum. The pause is the brake. There is also something profound that happens during a pause. You regain authorship. When you react instantly, you are scripted by habit. When you pause, you step outside the script. You become the editor. You begin asking different questions. What is actually happening here? What outcome do I want? What response aligns with the person I'm trying to become? Notice that the pause is not about being slow forever. It is about being deliberate first. Athletes understand this instinctively. A professional tennis player returning a serve does not swing wildly at the first sight of motion. There is a micro-calculation: position, angle, timing before movement. Precision requires milliseconds of awareness. In conversation, those milliseconds are emotional. Another story illustrates this beautifully. A father once told me about a moment with his teenage son. His son came home well past curfew. The father felt anger surge instantly, disrespect, fear, disappointment, all mixed together. His first impulse was to raise his voice. Instead, he walked into the kitchen. He poured himself a glass of water. He waited. By the time he sat down with his son, his tone had changed. Instead of, "How could you ignore the rules?" he asked, "Help me understand what happened." That single shift turned what could have been confrontation into dialogue. The pause did not eliminate accountability. It made accountability constructive. You might think, but if I pause, won't people think I'm weak? Won't silence make me look unsure? In reality, composure communicates strength. People associate steadiness with competence. They associate impulsiveness with instability. When you take a moment before speaking, your words carry more weight. There is another advantage to the pause that is often overlooked. It protects your future self. Many conflicts escalate because of words spoken too quickly. Once said, words cannot be retrieved. The pause filters language. It allows you to remove what is unnecessary, exaggerated, or harmful. And often after a brief pause, you realize the strongest move is not saying more, but saying less. Here is your training exercise for today. Choose one recurring trigger in your life. Perhaps it is criticism. Perhaps it is being interrupted. Perhaps it is delays or inefficiency. The next time that trigger appears, do only one thing. Take one slow breath before speaking. Not a dramatic breath, not theatrical, just one conscious inhale and exhale. That single breath is the beginning of mastery. You do not need to transform overnight. You need to interrupt once. Because every time you pause successfully, you strengthen a new pattern. And patterns shape identity. And the pause is short, but its consequences are long. In that brief space between feeling and action, you decide who leads, impulse or intention. And leadership, even over your own emotions, always begins with a moment of stillness. Chapter 3. The triggers you don't see. Most emotional reactions don't begin in the present moment. They begin yours earlier. A tone of voice, a facial expression, a short reply. Something small happens and suddenly your reaction feels larger than the situation requires. You tell yourself, this shouldn't bother me this much. And yet it does. That is a trigger. A trigger is not the event itself. It is the meaning your mind attaches to the event. Two people can experience the exact same situation and react completely differently. One person shrugs it off. The other feels deeply offended. Why? Because triggers are personal. They are shaped by memory, identity, and unresolved emotion. I once worked with a marketing director named Olivia who struggled during performance reviews. Outside of that context, she was confident and articulate. But whenever a supervisor offered even mild constructive feedback, her posture stiffened, but her responses became defensive. Her energy shifted. It didn't make sense on the surface. The feedback wasn't harsh. It wasn't humiliating. But something inside her reacted as if she were under threat. Eventually, during a coaching session, she shared a story from her early career. Her first manager had been hypercritical and dismissive. Meetings often ended with public corrections. She had felt small and exposed for months. That experience planted a belief. When authority questions me, I'm about to be embarrassed. Years later, even in supportive environments, her nervous system still carried that script. The trigger wasn't the feedback. The trigger was the memory attached to feedback. And most of us carry these hidden scripts. Perhaps you react strongly when someone interrupts you. On the surface, it's just a conversational disruption, but maybe it echoes years of not feeling heard. Maybe it reminds you of being overlooked in school or dismissed in early relationships. Perhaps you feel intense anxiety when plans change unexpectedly. It seems minor, but maybe unpredictability once represented instability in your life. Financial, emotional, or relational. Triggers are emotional echoes. They amplify ordinary moments into exaggerated reactions. One of the most useful questions you can ask yourself when emotion surges is this. What does this remind me of? Not why are they doing this? Not how dare they, but why does this feel familiar? That question shifts attention inward. There's a fascinating story about a man who would become irrationally angry whenever someone corrected his pronunciation, even gently, even privately. Friends noticed it, colleagues avoided it. When he finally examined it, he remembered being mocked repeatedly in childhood for his speech patterns. What felt like harmless correction to others felt like humiliation to him. The present event activated the past wound. Now, here is something important. Triggers are not weaknesses. They are indicators. They show you where something inside you still needs understanding. Ignoring triggers doesn't eliminate them. Suppressing them doesn't heal them. Only awareness reduces their power. Imagine your mind as a house with many rooms. Some rooms are well lit. Others remain closed, unexamined. Triggers often live in those closed rooms. When someone accidentally opens one, might you feel a rush of emotion? Not because of what they did, but because of what was stored there. Bringing light into those rooms changes everything. Another example comes from a colleague named Aaron. He had a pattern of shutting down whenever conflict arose in his relationship. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He simply withdrew, silent, distant, emotionally unavailable. His partner interpreted this as indifference. In reality, it was protection. Growing up, Aaron's household was loud and chaotic during disagreements. Voices escalated quickly. Conflict meant instability. So, as an adult, whenever tension appeared, his instinct was to retreat entirely. His trigger wasn't the argument. It was the memory of chaos. Once he recognized that, he began responding differently. Instead of disappearing, he would say, "I feel overwhelmed right now. I need a few minutes, but I want to come back to this." The behavior changed because the awareness changed. But here's the challenge. Triggers are often disguised as certainty. When you are triggered, you feel right, completely justified. The emotion feels proportionate, even if it isn't. That's why self-reflection must happen after the moment has passed. At the end of a difficult interaction, ask yourself, was my reaction equal to the situation, or did it carry extra weight? If it carried extra weight, that weight likely belongs to something older. This is not about blaming your past. It is about understanding your patterns. Emotional maturity means recognizing that not every strong feeling is about the present. Sometimes you are arguing with a ghost. Another powerful tool is mapping your recurring triggers. Write down situations that consistently produce strong emotional responses. Being ignored, being corrected, being compared, being rushed, being excluded. Then for each one, complete this sentence. When this happens, I tell myself, you may uncover hidden beliefs. I'm not respected. I'm not good enough. I'm losing control. I'm about to fail. Beliefs shape reactions. Once you identify the belief, you can challenge it. Is it objectively true? Is there another interpretation? Is this reaction helping me? When you separate the event from the story you attach to it, you weaken the trigger. And here is the most liberating realization. Triggers lose power when you own them. If someone presses a button and you say, "That's my sensitivity," you reclaim authority. If you insist, "They made me feel this way," you hand authority away. Ownership creates freedom. You cannot prevent every uncomfortable moment. You cannot control every tone, comment, or misunderstanding. But you can investigate why certain moments feel explosive. And when you understand your triggers, you stop being surprised by yourself. You begin responding with awareness instead of confusion. Triggers are teachers. They point toward unresolved narratives. They reveal unexamined fears. They expose hidden expectations. When you stop running from them and start studying them, you transform them from liabilities into sources of insight. The goal is not to eliminate emotion. The goal is to understand its roots. Because once you see the trigger clearly, it no longer controls you from the shadows. It becomes simply information. And information, when faced directly, becomes power. Chapter 4. Naming what you feel before it controls you. Most people believe they understand their emotions simply because they feel them. But feeling is not the same as understanding. If I asked you right now, "How are you feeling?" you might answer with something simple. Stressed, tired, fine, annoyed, good. These words are convenient, but they are often imprecise. And imprecision leads to mismanagement. Imagine a doctor who diagnoses every patient with the same word, pain. A headache under broken bone and food poisoning would all receive the same label. Treatment would be chaotic. Yet, this is how many people handle their internal world. Everything uncomfortable becomes anger. Everything heavy becomes stress. Everything uncertain becomes anxiety. When emotions remain vague, they remain powerful. Clarity weakens intensity. I once worked with a young attorney named Samuel who described himself as always angry. That was the word he used. Angry at work, at home, in traffic. Angry. But during a reflective exercise, he began describing specific situations. When a client delayed payment, he felt irritated. When a colleague received credit he believed he deserved, he felt resentful. When he made a mistake in court, he felt embarrassed. When his partner forgot an important date, he felt hurt. None of those emotions were identical, but he had been treating them as one. The moment he differentiated them, something shifted. Resentment required a different response than embarrassment. Hurt required vulnerability, not aggression. Irritation required boundaries, not explosions. Specificity gave him options. There is a concept in psychology called affect labeling. Research shows that when people put precise words to their emotions, activity in the emotional centers of the brain decreases and activity in rational processing areas increases. In simple terms, naming what you feel calms what you feel. Think about that. The act of identifying an emotion reduces its grip. But this requires emotional vocabulary. Many of us were never taught the language of feeling. We learned the language of achievement, performance, responsibility, but not the language of inner states. Consider expanding beyond basic categories. Instead of angry, ask, am I frustrated? Am I disappointed? Am I threatened? Am I feeling powerless? Instead of anxious, ask, am I uncertain? Am I unprepared? Am I anticipating judgment? Am I overwhelmed? Instead of sad, ask, am I lonely? Am I grieving? Am I feeling rejected? Am I feeling unseen? The more precise the label, the more targeted the response. Let me tell you about a small but powerful moment involving a mother and her 8-year-old daughter. The daughter came home from school visibly upset. When asked what was wrong, she said, "I'm mad." The mother could have stopped there, but instead she knelt down and gently asked, "Are you mad, Aunt, or are you embarrassed?" The girl paused. Then she whispered, "Embarrassed." A classmate had laughed at her during reading time. She wasn't angry. She felt exposed. Because the emotion was identified accurately. The conversation changed. The mother didn't lecture about controlling anger. She talked about courage and resilience. The child felt understood instead of corrected. Labeling created connection. When you mislabel your emotions, you misdirect your solutions. If you think you are angry when you are actually hurt, you may attack instead of communicate. If you think you are anxious when you are actually unprepared, you may worry instead of prepare. If you think you are stressed when you are actually resentful, you may overwork instead of address boundaries. Misunderstood emotions create repetitive cycles. Another example comes from a corporate leader who described feeling burned out. That was his word, but when examined more closely, his exhaustion wasn't from workload. It was from misalignment. He was spending most of his time on tasks that did not align with his strengths or values. The feeling wasn't pure fatigue. It was dissatisfaction. Once identified, the solution was not rest. It was delegation and strategic redesign of his responsibilities. Again, precision changed direction. Emotional awareness is not about overanalyzing every feeling. It is about slowing down long enough to observe what is happening inside you. And a simple practice can transform this skill. At the end of each day, ask yourself, what was the strongest emotion I felt today? What triggered it? What was the deeper feeling beneath it? Often there is a primary emotion and a secondary one. For example, someone criticizes your work. You feel anger immediately. But beneath the anger is insecurity or fear or shame. Anger is often a protective layer. It feels stronger, more controllable. But the underlying emotion is where growth happens. When you begin recognizing these layers, you stop being surprised by your intensity. You see it forming. Imagine standing outside during a storm. If you only notice lightning when it strikes, you will always be startled. But if you watch the clouds gather, feel the pressure shift in the air, hear the distant rumble, you are prepared. Emotions also have weather patterns. They build gradually. Subtle tension in your shoulders, faster breathing, irritation rising in conversation. So when you notice these early signals, you can intervene sooner. Emotional awareness is preventive power. And here is something equally important. Naming positive emotions matters too. Many people focus only on managing negative states. But understanding joy, gratitude, pride, contentment, and inspiration strengthens emotional stability. If you know what truly fulfills you, you can create more of it. Ask yourself, when did I feel genuinely proud? Recently. When did I feel calm and centered? When did I feel connected? Clarity about positive states helps you design your environment intentionally. The goal of emotional awareness is not control through suppression. It is control through comprehension. You cannot regulate what you refuse to recognize. When you move from I feel bad to I feel overlooked, something powerful happens. The emotion becomes information rather than chaos. Information can be addressed. Chaos only overwhelms. So the next time emotion rises, hearts do not rush to express it or dismiss it. Pause internally and ask, what exactly am I feeling? Give it a name. Because when you name it clearly, you reduce its intensity. And when you reduce its intensity, you regain your capacity to choose your response. And that choice is where mastery continues to grow. Chapter 5. Choosing your response with intention. There is a powerful difference between having control over your emotions and having control over your behavior. You will not always control what you feel, but you can always influence what you do next. This chapter is about that next step. Responding with intention is not about being passive. It is about being strategic. It is about aligning your actions with your values instead of your impulses. And imagine a chess player facing an unexpected move from an opponent. A novice reacts immediately, driven by surprise. A master pauses, scans the board, and considers long-term consequences. The master's advantage is not speed. It is foresight. Intentional response works the same way. I once coached a small business owner named Claire who struggled with customer complaints. Every time a client left negative feedback online, she felt personally attacked and her instinct was to defend her reputation publicly, sometimes with sharp language disguised as professionalism. Her responses were articulate but defensive. Over time, she noticed something troubling. Other potential customers would read the exchange and quietly move on. They weren't judging the complaint as much as they were judging her tone. One day, after receiving a particularly harsh review, Claire decided to try something different. Instead of responding immediately, she drafted a reply and saved it, but didn't send it. The next morning, she reread it. She deleted half of it. Then she rewrote it with one goal in mind: protect the brand, not her ego. Her new response was brief, calm, and solution-focused. She acknowledged the concern, offered direct contact to resolve it, and the reviewer for the feedback. Something interesting happened. Not only did the original client update the review after the issue was resolved, but several new customers later mentioned that her professional response gave them confidence in her business. The situation had not changed. Her response had, and that changed the outcome. When you choose your response intentionally, you shift from self-protection to long-term positioning. A helpful framework for intentional response includes 3 steps. Clarify, consider, communicate. First, clarify the objective. Before speaking, ask yourself, what result do I want from this interaction? Do you want to win the argument or preserve the relationship? Do you want to prove a point or solve a problem? Do you want to discharge emotion or create progress? Your objective determines your tone. Second, consider the consequences. If I say this, what will likely happen next? If I say nothing, what will happen? If I choose patience, what might improve? If I choose sarcasm, what might deteriorate? Many emotional mistakes occur because we focus on immediate satisfaction instead of downstream effects. Third, communicate with precision. Intentional responses are usually shorter, calmer, and clearer. They avoid exaggeration. They avoid absolute language like always and never. They focus on facts and impact rather than accusation. Instead of "you never respect my time," try "when meetings start late, it affects my schedule." Can we adjust this? One invites defense and the other invites cooperation. There's a story about a restaurant manager who faced an angry customer demanding a refund. The customer raised his voice and accused the staff of incompetence. The manager had two options: mirror the hostility or redirect the energy. He chose the second. He lowered his voice instead of raising it. He thanked the customer for bringing the issue forward. He apologized for the inconvenience without admitting fault prematurely. He then offered two clear solutions. Then within minutes, the customer's tone softened. Later, a staff member asked how he remained calm. The manager replied, "If I match his anger, we both lose. If I offer stability, someone has to adjust and it won't be me." That is intentional response in action. Another critical aspect of intentionality is timing. Not every conversation needs to happen immediately. When emotions run high, clarity runs low. Sometimes the most powerful response is "I need a little time to think about this." Let's revisit it. Delaying does not mean avoiding. It means preparing. Athletes do not enter competition without training. Yet, many people enter difficult conversations without preparation. Before addressing a sensitive issue, rehearse your key points. Decide what matters most. Remove unnecessary emotional language. Anchor yourself in your purpose. Intentional responses require preparation, not perfection. You may worry that responding calmly makes you appear less passionate. But consider this: passion without direction burns out quickly. Directed energy builds momentum. Intentional people are not emotionless. They are disciplined. Here is a small exercise to strengthen this skill. Think of a recent situation where you felt misunderstood or challenged. Rewrite your response as if your only goal was constructive progress. What words would you remove? What tone would you soften? What clarity would you add? Notice how different it feels. When you respond intentionally, you communicate confidence. You signal that you are not controlled by the moment. You show that you value outcomes over ego. And over time people learn something important about you. You are steady. That reputation becomes an asset. Intentional response is not about suppressing who you are. It is about expressing who you are at your best. In every interaction, you're either reinforcing old patterns or building new ones. Choose your response carefully because your response is your signature. Chapter 6. Mastering Anger and Anxiety Without Losing Yourself. Among all emotions, two tend to overpower the rest. Anger and anxiety. One looks outward, the other looks ahead. Anger says this should not be happening. Anxiety says, what if something goes wrong? Both can feel urgent. Both can feel justified. And both, if unmanaged, can quietly control your decisions. But here is something important to understand. Anger and anxiety are not enemies. They are signals. Problems arise when signals become dictators. Let's begin with anger. Anger often appears strong, but underneath it usually sits a violated expectation. You expected respect. You expected fairness. You expected appreciation. You expected things to go according to plan. When reality diverges from expectation, anger rushes in to close the gap. I once met a gym owner named Victor who prided himself on discipline. His staff admired his work ethic, but they feared his temper when standards slipped. One evening, a trainer forgot to lock up equipment properly. It wasn't catastrophic, but it required extra time to fix. The next morning, Victor exploded. Later, after reflecting, he realized something. His anger wasn't about the equipment. It was about identity. He saw himself as someone who ran a tight operation. The mistake felt like a threat to that identity. Once he understood this, he changed his approach. The next time an error happened and instead of reacting immediately, he asked a different question. What system failed here? That subtle shift from personal offense to structural problem reduced his anger dramatically. Anger shrinks when you shift from ego to evaluation. Instead of asking how could they do this to me, ask what actually needs to be corrected. Anger becomes destructive when it is personalized. It becomes productive when it is redirected. Now consider anxiety. And if anger is about unmet expectations in the present, anxiety is about imagined scenarios in the future. Your mind creates possibilities, often negative ones, and your body responds as if those possibilities are already happening. A former colleague of mine, Hannah, struggled deeply with anxiety before presentations. Weeks before speaking at a conference, she would imagine forgetting her points, stumbling over words, being judged harshly. The event had not happened, and yet her body reacted as if it had. Her breakthrough came when she stopped trying to eliminate anxiety and started interrogating it. Before one major presentation, she wrote down every fear she had. I will forget my opening. The audience will look bored. Someone will ask a question I can't answer. Then she wrote a second column titled, What is Within My Control? She practiced her opening thoroughly. She designed slides that engaged visually. She prepared responses for likely questions. So something shifted. Anxiety didn't vanish, but it became direction. Instead of spiraling in imagination, she converted fear into preparation. Anxiety loses intensity when it is translated into action. There is also a physical dimension to both anger and anxiety that cannot be ignored. When anger rises, energy surges, muscles tighten, breathing shortens. When anxiety rises, the chest constricts, thoughts accelerate, the body prepares for threat. Trying to solve these states purely through thinking is incomplete. The body must be included. One powerful technique is grounding. When anxiety spikes, notice 5 things you can see, 4 things you can physically feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. This exercise anchors your attention in the present instead of the imagined future. For anger, physical movement can be equally effective. A brisk walk, slow push-ups, and even stepping outside for fresh air. Movement releases excess energy safely instead of directing it at someone. Another small but practical tool is expectation recalibration. Ask yourself, is my expectation realistic? Many bursts of anger occur because expectations were assumed but never communicated. You assumed someone would respond quickly. You assumed someone understood your priority. You assumed alignment without clarity. Unspoken expectations create silent resentment. And when you communicate expectations clearly and verify understanding, you prevent many anger-triggering scenarios before they occur. With anxiety, we'll ask, is this a possibility or a probability? Your mind is excellent at generating possibilities. But not every possibility deserves equal attention. If you're anxious about a meeting going poorly, examine evidence. Has every meeting gone poorly? Or is your mind highlighting a worst-case scenario? Probability thinking restores proportion. There is a story about a sailor navigating through fog. When visibility dropped, panic was an option. Instead, he slowed the boat, relied on instruments, and trusted training. He could not eliminate the fog, but he could adjust his speed and focus. Anger and anxiety are fog. They obscure clarity. If you speed up impulsively, you risk collision. If you slow down, rely on principles, and trust preparation, you navigate safely. Mastery does not mean never feeling angry. And it does not mean never feeling anxious. It means recognizing the signal without surrendering to it. The next time anger arises, ask what expectation was violated. Is this about ego or improvement? What outcome do I actually want? The next time anxiety appears, ask, what am I predicting? What evidence supports it? What action would reduce uncertainty? These questions create space. And in that space, control returns. Anger can fuel courage when directed wisely. The anxiety can sharpen preparation when managed thoughtfully. Neither emotion needs to dominate you. When understood, both become tools. And tools in steady hands build rather than destroy. Chapter 7. Emotional Strength in the Real World. It is one thing to understand emotional control in theory. It is another thing to live it on a random Tuesday afternoon when you are tired, rushed, and someone tests your patience. Emotional strength is not proven in silence or solitude. It is revealed in traffic jams, family dinners, performance reviews, missed deadlines, and unexpected criticism. It shows up in ordinary moments. A hospital nurse named Priya once told me that the most difficult part of her job was not the long hours or the physical exhaustion. It was managing her emotional state in front of patients and families. One evening, a patient's relative began shouting at her, accusing her of negligence, blaming her for delays that were beyond her control. Priya felt the heat rise in her chest. Her instinct was to defend herself point by point. But she remembered something she had trained herself to practice. Separate emotion from objective. Her objective was not to win the exchange. Her objective was to de-escalate the situation and protect the patient's care environment. So instead of matching volume, she lowered hers. Instead of arguing facts, she acknowledged emotion. "I can see you're worried," she said calmly. "Let's talk about what's happening." The shouting gradually softened. Later, Tony admitted something honest. "I still felt angry, but I decided not to let my feelings decide the outcome." That is emotional strength. It is not the absence of emotion. It is the presence of direction. In the real world, emotional mastery often looks subtle. It looks like not sending the email you typed. It looks like asking a clarifying question instead of making an assumption. It looks like stepping away before a conversation turns sharp. So, it also looks like restraint when no one is watching. Consider the workplace. A manager receives news that a proposal was rejected. Months of preparation dismissed in a short message. Frustration is natural, but how that manager reacts sets the emotional tone for the entire team. If the manager storms into the office blaming others, morale drops instantly. If the manager gathers the team and says, "Let's analyze what we can improve," the setback becomes data instead of drama. And teams mirror leadership. Families mirror emotional patterns, too. A father comes home exhausted. The house is loud. A child spills juice on the floor moments after being told to be careful. There are two options. Option 1. Raise your voice, lecture harshly, let frustration spill over. The child learns fear. Option 2. Kneel down, hand them a towel, and say, "Accidents happen. Let's clean it up." The child learns responsibility without shame. The difference between those two responses is not the child's behavior. It is the adult's emotional regulation. Real-world emotional strength is especially visible in relationships. A woman named Elena once described how she used to approach disagreements with her partner like a courtroom. She gathered evidence. She presented arguments. She aimed to prove her point decisively. She often won the argument, but she felt increasingly distant from her partner. One day, during a tense conversation, she decided to experiment. Instead of presenting evidence, she described impact. "When this happens, I feel disconnected," she said softly. The conversation shifted immediately. Winning was replaced with understanding. In everyday life, ego often disguises itself as righteousness. You believe you are defending truth, but sometimes you are defending pride. Emotional strength asks a different question. What serves the relationship long term? This applies even in small interactions. In traffic, as someone cuts you off, you feel a surge of irritation. You can accelerate, glare, honk, and carry that tension into your next appointment. Or you can exhale and remind yourself, "This moment does not deserve control over my mood." The event lasts seconds. The emotional residue can last hours if you let it. Emotional strength means refusing to extend minor discomfort into prolonged suffering. There is also a quiet aspect of strength that rarely gets discussed. Emotional consistency. Anyone can be calm when things are easy. Strength is demonstrated when conditions are uneven. A coach once explained to his athletes that their true level was not defined by their best performance, but by their worst reaction under pressure. If frustration consistently lowers your standard of behavior, that is where growth is needed. Consistency builds trust. When people know you will respond predictably, even in difficulty, they relax around you. They open up. They collaborate honestly. Too unpredictable emotional swings, however, create uncertainty. And uncertainty creates distance. In practical terms, emotional strength in daily life involves 3 habits. First, slow your speech during tension. Rapid speech often signals internal agitation. Slowing down signals control. Second, lower your volume intentionally. Calm tones naturally regulate group energy. Third, ask one question before making one statement. Questions gather information. Statements declare judgment. These small adjustments transform interactions. Another important dimension is recovery time. Even emotionally strong individuals feel irritation, disappointment, and stress. The difference is how quickly they return to baseline. If a minor inconvenience ruins your entire day, your recovery system needs strengthening. Practice shortening that gap. After a difficult moment, consciously reset. Step outside, stretch, refocus on the next task. Do not rehearse the irritation repeatedly. Emotional strength is built in repetition. Every time you choose composure over chaos, you reinforce a new identity. You become the person who does not escalate unnecessarily. None the person who can be relied upon in tension. The person whose presence steadies rather than intensifies. In the real world, that reputation becomes invaluable. Opportunities gravitate towards stability. Relationships deepen around safety, and internally something powerful happens. You begin trusting yourself not because you never feel overwhelmed but because you know you can handle what you feel. Emotional strength is not loud. It does not demand attention. It shows up in the way you enter a room, in the way you respond under pressure, in the way you protect connection over ego. And in everyday life, that quiet steadiness becomes your greatest advantage. Chapter 8. Becoming the calm leader of your own mind. There is a difference between managing emotions occasionally and becoming someone who is emotionally grounded by identity. Up to this point, we have explored skills, pausing, recognizing triggers, labeling emotions, choosing responses. But lasting change does not come from isolated techniques. It comes from identity. And when you shift from "I'm trying to control my emotions" to "I am someone who remains steady," everything begins to align differently. Behavior follows identity. Think about someone you consider emotionally strong. Perhaps it's a mentor, a parent, a leader, or even a friend. When tension rises, they do not transform into a different person. Their steadiness is consistent. It is who they are, not something they perform. That level of composure is not accidental. So, it is practiced until it becomes natural. I once met a retired military officer named Thomas who now ran leadership workshops. During one session, a heated debate broke out between 2 participants over a controversial topic. Voices rose. Opinions clashed. The atmosphere tightened. Thomas remained seated, listening carefully. When the room finally quieted, he spoke in a tone so measured it immediately commanded attention. Not because it was loud, but because it was controlled. Later, when someone asked him how he stayed so calm in tense situations, he said something profound. "Years ago, I decided that my emotional state would never be controlled by the loudest person in the room." That decision became his identity. He did not wake up each day hoping to be calm. He expected himself to be calm. That expectation guided his preparation, his breathing, his listening, his speech. He became the emotional reference point others aligned to. Becoming the calm leader of your own mind requires a similar internal commitment. It begins with a simple declaration. My emotions are information, not commands. When you truly adopt this belief, you stop obeying every internal impulse. Leadership, even self-leadership, is about setting standards. Ask yourself, what emotional standard do I want to live by? Do you want to be someone who escalates easily or someone who absorbs pressure? Do you want to be known for volatility or for composure? Once defined, your standard becomes a filter. There is a small but powerful story about a martial arts instructor who was asked how he remained unshaken during sparring matches with aggressive students. He replied, I trained my nervous system long before I entered the fight. That statement applies beyond physical combat. You train your nervous system through daily habits, consistent sleep, intentional breathing exercises, moments of stillness, reflection at the end of the day. Emotional resilience is not built in crisis. It is built in routine. Another crucial shift in identity involves perspective. When something frustrating happens, instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Ask, how does this test my standard? This question reframes difficulty as opportunity. A business consultant named Maya once described how she used to dread difficult clients. She would anticipate tension, rehearse defensive arguments, and leave meetings drained. Then she reframed her mindset. She began viewing each challenging interaction as a leadership simulation. Instead of feeling attacked, she felt tested. Her focus shifted from protecting herself to demonstrating steadiness. Over time, she noticed something surprising. The more stable she became, the fewer confrontations escalated. Her calm demeanor subtly influenced others. Identity radiates. When you are deeply grounded, people sense it. When you are easily shaken, they sense that too. Another aspect of becoming a calm leader internally is self-dialogue. Pay attention to how you speak to yourself when mistakes occur. Do you attack yourself? Do you exaggerate failure? Do you spiral into self-criticism? Or do you correct yourself firmly but constructively? The way you manage your internal voice mirrors the way you manage external situations. If your inner dialogue is chaotic, your outer responses will reflect that instability. But if your inner dialogue is measured and solution-oriented, your outward presence strengthens. Try this shift. Instead of saying, I can't believe I messed that up, say, that didn't go as planned. What's the next move? Leaders look forward. Becoming emotionally grounded also requires accepting that not every outcome will be comfortable. There will be days when you feel misunderstood. Days when plans collapse. Days when tension is unavoidable. But identity-based composure means you do not abandon your standard when conditions worsen. Consistency builds credibility with others and with yourself. Imagine waking up each day knowing that no matter what unfolds, you will respond with steadiness. That confidence changes how you walk into meetings, how you handle disagreement, how you navigate uncertainty. You stop fearing your own reactions. And that freedom is powerful. To strengthen this identity, create a daily affirmation tied to behavior. Not something vague like, I am calm. Something specific. I pause before responding, or I lower my voice when tension rises, or I seek clarity before judgment. Repeat it, practice it, embody it. Identity is reinforced through repetition. There is a reason experienced captains are trusted during storms. It is not because they control the weather. It is because they control themselves. You cannot prevent every emotional wave, but you can decide how you stand when it hits. Over time, people will begin looking to you during moments of tension, not because you demand authority, but because you demonstrate stability, and internally, something shifts permanently. You no longer feel at the mercy of moods. You no longer fear difficult conversations. You no longer dread pressure. You trust your ability to remain centered. Becoming the calm leader of your own mind is not about perfection. It is about alignment. Alignment between your values and your reactions, between your standards and your speech, between your intention and your behavior. And when that alignment becomes consistent, emotional mastery stops being a technique. It becomes who you are. As we come to the end of this audiobook, take a moment to reflect on what you've just built. You didn't just listen to ideas about emotional intelligence. You walked through a system. You explored the hidden cost of uncontrolled emotions. How small reactions quietly shape reputation, relationships, and long-term opportunities. You learned that emotional damage is rarely loud, but often lasting. You discovered the power of the pause, that tiny and almost invisible space between stimulus and response where your real strength lives. You saw how slowing down your breath, your voice, your timing can completely change the direction of a conversation. You uncovered your triggers, the old stories, and silent expectations that amplify present moments. You began separating the event from the meaning attached to it. You practiced naming emotions precisely, understanding that clarity weakens intensity. You realized that not every feeling labeled anger is truly anger and not every wave of stress is what it seems. You learned how to choose responses with intention instead of impulse, aligning your behavior with long-term outcomes instead of short-term relief. You explored how to master anger and anxiety, not by suppressing them, but by redirecting them into evaluation, preparation, and grounded action. You saw what emotional strength looks like in real life, in workplaces, in families, nor in everyday interactions that quietly define who you are. And finally, you stepped into something deeper. Identity. The shift from trying to control emotions to becoming someone who leads them. That is not a small transformation. But here is the truth. Insight without practice fades. Emotional mastery is not built by understanding alone. It is built by repetition. So here is your invitation. Over the next 7 days, practice one thing intentionally. Pause once before responding in a tense moment. Name one emotion precisely instead of vaguely. Lower your voice instead of raising it. Ask one clarifying question instead of making one accusation. Small actions repeated consistently. Do not aim for perfection. Aim for awareness. There will be moments when you still react. That's human. The goal is not emotional silence. The goal is emotional leadership. Every time you choose composure, you reinforce a new identity. And every time you respond deliberately, you build trust both with others and with yourself. Imagine who you will become after 30 days of conscious emotional control. Imagine how differently people will experience you. Imagine how much mental energy you'll save by not escalating small disturbances. Calm is not weakness. Calm is command. And the more you practice, the more natural it becomes. If this audiobook brought you value, take a second to reflect on why. Was it a specific chapter and a realization about your triggers? A reminder that you are capable of more stability than you thought? Growth begins with awareness, but it multiplies with consistency. Thank you for investing this time in yourself. In a world that rewards speed, distraction, and reaction, choosing to slow down and strengthen your emotional foundation is rare. And that decision alone already sets you apart. If this message resonated with you, then share it with someone who could benefit from it. A friend under pressure, a colleague navigating stress, a family member trying to handle conflict better. You never know which insight might shift someone's path. And if you're committed to continuing this journey of self-mastery, make sure you stay connected for the next audiobook. We'll keep building discipline, clarity, resilience, and the mindset that turns internal control into external success. Until next time, remember, you cannot control every situation, but you can control who you choose to be within it, and that changes everything.